Hedge fund manager Bill Ackman is at war with Business Insider, MIT, Harvard University, really just like the whole elite university system in general. And there is a lot to this story. So let's talk a little bit today about what has happened, what's going on now, and what we can take away. I'm Carly Riley. Let's get into it. I don't even know where to start this story. We should probably start it at October 7th when Hamas terrorists killed over 1,200 innocent Israelis. But frankly, we could start it before then. Frustrations over elite universities have been brewing for a long time. In some circles, it's not even brewing. They're fully just bubbling over, and you hear complaints about these universities for any number of reasons. Tuitions are sky high. Kids are partying more than they're studying. There are more administrators than professors at a lot of these schools. And of course, there is a sense that these schools aren't trying to create independent free thinkers, but rather crank out leftist ideologues who have one narrow view of how the world should be. We could start this story in 2020 when Bill Maher made a joke that captured just about everything I just said.
A third of students now spend less than 5 hours a week studying, and when they do, it's for their onerous magnum cum bullshit course load of sports marketing, history through Twitter, advanced racist spotting, intro to microaggressions, and You Owe Me an Apology 101.
You Owe Me an Apology 101. Sounds like a nice easy A. You know, I wish they had that class when I was in school. So frustrations with universities are not new, but they did seem to reach a new fevered pitch in the wake of October 7th. And specifically, you have a cohort of more liberal-leaning Jewish donors, including folks like Bill Ackman, who were really frustrated in the wake of October 7th. In the post heard round the world, you had, for example, a group of 36 Harvard student organizations make a statement that singularly blamed Israel for the attack on October 7th. This statement came out within 24 hours of the attacks before Israel had responded in any way. So there was backlash against all of this, of course. Bill Ackman was incredibly vocal, tweeting his frustration about these statements, tweeting information about what was happening in Israel and Gaza, tweeting the stories of hostages, etc., etc. Claudine Gay, for her part, she was the then president of Harvard. She released 3 different statements the week that this all went down. A first statement on Monday after the attacks, which many people felt was too convoluted and too watered down. A second statement on Tuesday, which took a stronger, harder line, condemning Hamas as a terrorist group. A third statement, a video statement on Thursday, in which she condemned anti-Semitism. She attended a Harvard student event, a Jewish student event, in which you had 1,000 students and faculty present, where she stood up and said, "We have your back. We know the difference between right and wrong." She apparently got a standing ovation at that event within Harvard. But if all of that was going to generate any goodwill, it quickly came crumbling down on December 5th. On December 5th, 3 university presidents, Claudine Gay of Harvard, Liz McGill of MIT, and Sally Kornbluth of the University of Pennsylvania, were called to Congress to testify about what was happening on their respective campuses, specifically in regards to anti-Semitism. And this is when things took a turn for the bizarre. When asked specifically if calling for the genocide of Jews violated the university's rules on bullying and harassment, all 3 presidents said that it was context dependent. It depends on the context. Let's take a listen to it here.
And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
What's the context?
Targeted as an individual, at an individual.
It's targeted at Jewish students, Jewish individuals. Do you understand your testimony is dehumanizing them? Do you understand that dehumanization is part of anti-Semitism?
So this is a PR failure of epic proportions. Now, I'm hard to offend. I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. But what was laid bare here for many people was this sense of hypocrisy, the sense that these women who are presiding over universities from which it feels like we are constantly told that speech is violence and that if you are remotely offended, you are entitled to that feeling, you are right to have that feeling, and the other person is definitely in the wrong regardless of their intention, et cetera, that people who seem to be presiding over an environment in which all of that is held to be true, then simultaneously won't condemn something as simple as we can't call for the genocide of Jews, the hypocrisy was too much for a lot of people. And while Harvard doesn't fire Claudine Gay on the spot or immediately after that congressional testimony, she is clearly now on borrowed time. And the next shoe to drop in all of this, and the next shoe to drop for Claudine Gay, is the plagiarism scandal, which is accusations, over 50 accusations against Claudine Gay of having plagiarized her academic work starting back in the 1990s when she did her doctoral dissertation. Now, there is a lot of public discourse about this and about whether she should be fired on the basis of the plagiarism claims, whether they're legitimate, if this is about the fact that she's a Black woman. And the truth is, I find a lot of the discourse useless because frankly, it is not evident to me that many of the talking heads or the pundits or the people weighing in on this issue have actually looked at the 50 specific instances of plagiarism that she has actually been accused of. They're not easy to find. I tried, I looked, I found a few. I didn't find all of them by any means. And frankly, I don't even know that I would be in a position to gauge how serious or not many of them are. And I would encourage anybody who has not looked at these specific accusations to bite their tongue before having a determination about whether, on the basis of these plagiarism claims, Claudine Gay should or should not have been fired. But this is where Bill Ackman comes back into the story in a big way. Because this is the moment that Bill Ackman goes from fighting a single front war to a double-fronted war. What is this two-front war that Bill Ackman is fighting? The first front in this war is arguably an offensive war. It's an offensive battle. The offensive battle that Bill has been fighting all along since October 7th. The way universities have handled things since October 7th. And specifically, Ackman has concluded that the rot that is at the core of these institutions in many ways is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. He tweeted that anti-Semitism was not actually the root of the problem, that the anti-Semitism was, in effect, a byproduct of this deeper, more pernicious DEI ideology, which Claudine Gay specifically, and folks like her, fostered and ran while at these universities. Now, on the second front, Ackman is fighting a defensive war, because after Claudine Gay was fired for these accusations of plagiarism, which Bill Ackman did a lot to amplify, he posted and tweeted quite a bit about the plagiarism scandal, Business Insider published a story accusing Neri Oxman, Bill Ackman's wife, of 27 counts of plagiarism during her time at MIT, where she was a presidential fellow and had worked in various capacities. Ackman vehemently objected to this article, both on its merits, making the claims that others had been making about Claudine Gay's accusations of plagiarism, which is that she had, yes, maybe copied definitions of terms from Wikipedia, but that the instances of plagiarism she was being accused of were not substantial or meaningful or important to the overall idea she was putting forth in her academic works. But he also opposed to the way in which Business Insider went about it, which is to say, gave them an hour's heads up that this story was coming out and no time to actually respond to the specific accusations of plagiarism of which they were being accused. Now, as somebody who has myself been victimized by Business Insider, I was in a Business Insider article in which I was portrayed as a victim of sexism that I was not a victim of. And despite the fact that I had told this reporter that I was not a victim of workplace sexism, she never published a story largely about how I was a victim of workplace sexism. But that's a separate issue. The point being, I fully stand by Bill Ackman in his frustration with the way that Business Insider runs their business. And journalist would not be a word I would ascribe to anybody at Business Insider. Nevertheless, Bill now has these two wars. He has this defensive war where he is now outraged by Business Insider and is defending his wife and their credibility. And he has this offensive war in which he is now going out after DEI, fighting Mark Cuban on Twitter about it, et cetera, et cetera. But these two fronts, to me, actually intersect in a way that I don't think Bill Ackman realizes. And that's this. DEI is a controversial topic because on the surface, it seems like an obviously patently good thing. Most of us support the idea of diversity and inclusion and a world where opportunities are created for the many and not just the few. And yet there's also this feeling that this is an ideology that goes deeper than what it may just appear on the surface, that DEI is an ideology that rather than helping us live up to the highest versions of American ideals: capitalism, meritocracy, opportunity for all. DEI, in fact, rejects these ideals as inherently problematic and racist and sexist, and undercuts some of what has made America so great. So I'd say this: at its best, DEI lifts us all up and makes workplaces sharper and more dynamic, helps the many and not just the few, and overcomes inherent biases and systemic failures in any system that involves humans. But at its worst, it's a rhetorical tool used by the dumb and or lazy and or talentless to grab at power where they otherwise should be entitled to none. I think Ackman agrees with that. But what Bill Ackman misses, in my view, brings us back to Business Insider. Business Insider is owned by Axel Springer, which is a tech and media company that is itself owned by KKR, a private equity fund and seemingly Bill Ackman's buddy. After Business Insider's article was published, Bill Ackman tweeted this: "I had forgotten Axel Springer had acquired Business Insider. Axel Springer is now controlled by KKR. I am therefore incredibly shocked by the conduct of a company controlled by KKR, a firm that I have had enormous respect for over the years. I hope they have no idea what is going on in their Business Insider subsidiary, and I'm going to look into it." And this is where Bill Ackman starts to fucking lose me, because in the scheme of problematic behaviors by KKR subsidiaries, I frankly wouldn't rank Business Insider. Because while Bill Ackman and so many like him are understandably, to a degree, disheartened by some of the messaging that comes out of this blanket idea of DEI, which seems to hate on some of the things that make America great, he simultaneously fails to recognize or criticize the way his own friends and colleagues are themselves completely undercutting American ideals, mutilating systems of capitalism for their own enrichment. Let's get a little more specific here. Private equity companies like KKR, generally speaking, buy up businesses by borrowing a lot of money, loading the business up with debt, cutting costs like crazy, which usually means layoffs, and in some cases, pushing the companies into bankruptcy while extracting as many fees as possible from the productive business for themselves in the process. For example, after KKR bought Toys R Us, remember Toys R Us? They installed Dave Brandon as the CEO. Toys R Us ultimately went bankrupt. And days before the bankruptcy, Dave Brandon and other executives paid out millions in bonuses to themselves prior to the bankruptcy because they knew they wouldn't be able to get that money after the bankruptcy. And then told all of the employees who had been previously told that they would be paid severance, that they were no longer being paid severance because, we're now bankrupt. And this story, actually, unlike many other stories like it in the world of private equity, actually had a slightly happier ending because there was some amount of severance that was ultimately paid out after big public shaming campaigns were undertaken by Toys R Us employees and class action lawsuits, many of them, were filed. KKR's subsidiary absolutely fucked working middle-class people, people who had worked for Toys R Us for not that much money for 29 years, who stayed even after things were going downhill on the belief that they were going to be paid severance. And then they weren't. And this is one example, and it's in retail. For decades, KKR owned Laureate Education, a for-profit college. You think you're pissed about what's happening at universities today? Wait till you get a load of what for-profit colleges do, in which for every dollar spent on tuition, just 29 cents of it is actually used towards anything educational. They've jacked up prices on emergency room services, on ambulatory services, the things that people need to live their lives in a way that makes them feel like the economy is working. Bill Ackman hates the fact that DEI is gaining adherence, but it is appealing to people in large part because of the ways that Bill Ackman's friends have fucked over consumers. And look, I am a capitalist through and through. I don't think private equity is all bad. At its best, private equity is adding value to American businesses. It's fueling long-term growth and job creation. It's creating efficiencies. It's improving American lifestyle through consumer goods and services. But at its worst, private equity is a tool for the dumb, the lazy, or the talentless, people who can't or won't build actually value-additive businesses, to grab at money and power where they otherwise should be entitled to none. The frustration that most of us have with journalists, with stories, is often not what on its face is written in the article itself, but what's been left out, what's been omitted, what context what framing wasn't included. Bill Ackman is mad that he and his wife didn't have enough time to explain, to contextualize, to investigate, and provide more information around these accusations of plagiarism by Business Insider. And the context that's missing from Bill Ackman's, I think, somewhat legitimate crusade against universities and far leftist ideology is the fact that he is not critical of his own friends' contributions to the problem. All right, folks, that's today's show. As you can see, I have a different background. I'm trying a little green screen. I will be getting regular with content at some point here this year, but as I mentioned last time, I am still trying to figure out some things with my other businesses, and I want to get that in order before I fully commit to any sort of cadence on the CPR show here. But if you have been enjoying this content, I would love if you would subscribe to the channel, like, comment, whatever. I would love to have you along for the ride as I do get more regular here. Hopefully in the next month or so, but we'll see. See you next time.